Never accept a dare in a bar after midnight, my best friend whispered once. I should have listened. Instead, at exactly 12:17 a.m., with cheap neon lights buzzing overhead and the bass from the speakers vibrating through the wooden floor, I made the single most reckless decision of my life. It started as a joke. The kind of stupid late-night bar game people play when the drinks are strong and the week has been too long. We were packed into a narrow booth near the back of Murphy's Bar in downtown Chicago, the air smelling like citrus cocktails, spilled beer, and rain blowing in every time the door opened. My friend Tara slammed her glass down on the sticky table and pointed across the room. Okay, Liv, she said, grinning like a villain in a movie. Your turn. Truth or dare? I should have picked truth. I always pick truth. But that night my brain was floating somewhere between 2 margaritas and the relief of finally finishing a brutal 60-hour workweek at the clinic. So I smiled. Dare. The table erupted. Everyone leaned forward like sharks catching the scent of blood. Tara turned slowly and pointed again, this time more deliberately, toward the far end of the bar. See that guy? She asked. I followed her finger. At first I didn't notice him. That's the strange thing. He wasn't loud. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't trying to be seen. He sat alone at the corner of the bar, perfectly still, like the calm center of a hurricane. Dark suit, white shirt, a glass of whiskey resting untouched in front of him. The golden light from the hanging lamps caught the sharp line of his jaw. He looked maybe early 30s, tall even while seated, shoulders straight, posture controlled in a way that made the crowded bar seem to bend around him without touching. What about him? I asked. Tara's smile widened. He's the most serious man in this entire bar. Nobody's talked to him all night. I shrugged. So? She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was delivering a royal decree. Your dare is simple. The table went silent. Even the music seemed to drop a beat. Tara pointed again. Go kiss him. For a second I thought she was joking. Then I saw everyone watching me, waiting. You're kidding, I said. Nope. Tara slid my phone across the table like it was evidence in a courtroom. 1 kiss. 5 seconds. Then come back. My stomach flipped. Across the room, the man still hadn't moved. Not once. People brushed past him. The bartender refilled drinks. A couple laughed loudly nearby. But he stayed there, calm, unreadable, like none of it belonged to him. I exhaled slowly. It's just a kiss, I told myself. A dumb dare in a loud bar at midnight. Nothing more. I slid out of the booth. My friends erupted in cheers behind me. The wooden floor creaked under my boots as I walked across the room. Every step felt louder than the music. 10 feet away. 5 feet away. Now I could see him clearly. Dark hair brushed back neatly. Eyes focused on the amber swirl of whiskey in his glass. Calm. Serious. Untouchable. I stopped beside him. For the first time, he looked up. His eyes met mine. Cold. Sharp. Observant. The kind of gaze that made you feel like you just stepped into the wrong room. My heart pounded. Too late to turn back now. So before my courage could evaporate, I leaned forward and kissed him. The music kept playing. The crowd kept moving. But something in the room shifted. Because when I pulled back, the man didn't look surprised. He looked interested. I expected him to shove me away. Or laugh. Or at the very least look confused. Instead, he simply watched me. His expression calm in a way that made my heartbeat suddenly feel very loud in my ears. Up close, his eyes were darker than I thought, almost black under the warm bar lights, steady and focused like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had just appeared in front of him. I straightened slowly, realizing my hand was still resting on the polished edge of the bar. The music thumped behind me. Someone laughed across the room, but the small space around us felt strangely quiet. He did not move. He did not blink. For a full second neither of us spoke. Then he tilted his head slightly and asked, in a voice low and controlled, was there a reason for that? My brain scrambled for something intelligent to say. Instead the truth slipped out before my dignity could stop it. It was a dare. His eyebrow lifted almost imperceptibly. A dare. I nodded quickly, suddenly aware of how ridiculous the whole situation sounded. My friends. They told me to kiss the most serious man in the bar. I gestured vaguely behind me toward the booth where Tara and the others were pretending not to stare while very obviously staring. For the first time, the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. More like the beginning of one. He glanced past me toward the table. The moment his gaze shifted, something strange happened across the room. The bartender stopped mid-movement. Two men near the entrance straightened slightly. I did not understand why, but the shift in the room was unmistakable. The man beside me returned his attention to me again, calm and deliberate. And you decided I was the most serious man here. You looked like you were thinking about something important, I said quickly. Or judging everyone. That earned a soft exhale that might have been a quiet laugh. He picked up his whiskey glass and finally took a slow sip. The movement was unhurried, controlled, like he had nowhere else to be in the world. When he set the glass back down, he studied me again with a kind of curious focus. So you walked across a crowded bar and kissed a stranger, he said. Yes. Without knowing anything about him. Yes. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in interest. That is a surprising amount of confidence. It was a margarita, I admitted. And poor decision-making. Another small pause stretched between us. I felt heat rising to my face and realized I was still standing far too close to him. I took a small step back. Well, I said awkwardly. I should probably return to my friends before they start another dare. I turned halfway toward the booth. His voice stopped me. Olivia. I froze. Slowly I turned back. How do you know my name? I asked. He did not answer right away. Instead, he glanced briefly toward the bartender, then toward the door, then back to me again with that same calm, unreadable expression. People tend to say names loudly when they are cheering, he said. I remembered Tara shouting my name across the room 5 minutes earlier and felt my embarrassment double. Right, I said softly. He leaned one elbow against the bar, studying me as if I had just walked into the middle of his evening. Plans without permission. Tell me something, Olivia, he said. When you accepted that dare, did you consider the possibility that the stranger might not appreciate it? I swallowed. I was hoping you had a sense of humor. A quiet silence followed. Then he looked at me again with a calm intensity that made my pulse jump. Fortunately, he said slowly, tonight I do. For a moment, neither of us moved. The music filled the bar again. Glasses clinked somewhere behind me, and someone near the door shouted for another round, but the strange quiet around us remained. He watched me with the same calm curiosity, like I had interrupted his evening in a way he had not planned but was not entirely unhappy about. I shifted my weight and glanced back toward my friends. Tara was practically hanging halfway out of the booth, trying to see what was happening. When she noticed me looking, she raised both fists in silent celebration. I turned back quickly, mortified. I should really go, I said again, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. My friends are going to interrogate me for the next hour. The man beside me studied my face for another second before nodding once. They seem enthusiastic. That is one word for it. I took another small step backward, ready to escape the situation before my confidence evaporated completely. Then something unexpected happened. The bartender approached us. He moved quickly but with a strange carefulness, like he did not want to interrupt. He placed a fresh glass of whiskey on the bar in front of the man beside me without asking what he wanted. Your usual, sir, the bartender said quietly. Sir. The word landed strangely in my ears. The man nodded once in acknowledgement. No wallet appeared. No credit card. No receipt. The bartender simply stepped away again as if the transaction had already been decided long before tonight. I noticed something else then. The two men near the entrance that I had seen earlier. They were not drinking. They were not talking. They were watching the room with calm attention, like security guards at an expensive event. When the man beside me shifted slightly on his stool, both of them glanced toward him for half a second before returning their focus to the door. A strange chill ran down my spine. I looked back at him slowly. He lifted the glass again and took a small sip. Is something wrong? He asked. I hesitated. Do you come here often? It was a ridiculous question, but it was the first thing my brain produced. His expression changed just enough that I knew he found the question interesting. Occasionally, he said. And everyone here knows you. He set the glass down carefully. Some people do. That was not really an answer. My eyes drifted again toward the two men near the door, then toward the bartender who had suddenly become very busy polishing glasses. Then back to him. Are you famous or something? I asked before I could stop myself. For a brief moment his expression became completely unreadable. Then he leaned slightly closer, lowering his voice just enough that the conversation became ours alone. No, he said calmly. But some people would say I am recognized. Something about the way he said it made my stomach flip. I suddenly became very aware of the fact that I had walked across a crowded bar and kissed a man I knew absolutely nothing about. I forced a small laugh. Well, I said, trying to sound casual, that makes tonight even more embarrassing. His eyes held mine steadily. On the contrary, he said, most people in this room would never have the courage to do what you just did. I blinked. Kiss a stranger? Approach me, he corrected gently. The way he said it made the air between us feel heavier. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could speak, one of the men near the entrance stepped closer and leaned slightly toward him. He did not interrupt out loud. He simply murmured something quietly near the man's shoulder. The man beside me listened without turning his head. After a second, he nodded once. The man stepped back again immediately. I stared at the exchange, confused. When I looked back at him, his eyes were still on me. Calm, focused, almost amused. Olivia, he said slowly, has anyone ever told you that accepting dares can lead to very unexpected nights? My heart skipped. I am starting to realize that. He held my gaze for another quiet moment before speaking again. Allow me to introduce myself properly, he said. My name is Sebastian Hale. The name settled in the air between us like it carried more weight than a normal introduction should. Sebastian Hale. I repeated it silently in my head, trying to decide why the sound of it made the room feel slightly smaller. Sebastian, I said slowly, testing the name out loud. Nice to meet you officially. He inclined his head slightly, the motion controlled and almost old-fashioned. The pleasure is mine, Olivia. I was not entirely sure that was true, but the calm confidence in his voice made it sound believable. I folded my arms loosely, trying to look less like someone who had just made the most impulsive decision of her life in front of a complete stranger. So now that we have introductions out of the way, I said carefully, I should probably return to my table before my friends assume you kidnapped me. The corner of his mouth moved again. I assure you that was not the plan for tonight. Good, I said quickly. Because I have work at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and my boss already thinks I stay out too late. His eyes sharpened slightly with interest. What do you do, Olivia? Physical therapy assistant, I said. Rehabilitation clinic about 15 minutes from here. He studied me for a moment, as if storing that information somewhere behind those calm dark eyes. You help people recover. That is the idea. I shrugged lightly. Most days I just convince stubborn patients that stretching for 10 minutes will not ruin their lives. That earned a quiet breath that sounded suspiciously like amusement. A valuable skill, he said. I glanced again toward my booth. Tara was now dramatically fanning herself with a cocktail napkin while the others whispered excitedly. They were absolutely going to interrogate me the second I returned. I shifted my weight again. Well, I said, this has been the most unusual 5 minutes of my week. Sebastian leaned slightly against the bar, completely unbothered by the noise and movement around us. And you are leaving already. I blinked. Was there more? His gaze remained steady. Most conversations last longer than 5 minutes. Most conversations do not begin with a dare and a surprise kiss, I replied. That time he did smile, though it was small and controlled, the kind of smile that appeared rarely but meant something when it did. Fair point. For a moment neither of us spoke again. The bartender slid another drink down the counter toward a group. Further down the bar, someone near the jukebox laughed loudly. The normal rhythm of the place continued, yet the strange pocket of calm around Sebastian still remained. I took a breath and stepped backward again. Thank you for being a good sport, I said. Not everyone would react so politely. His gaze followed my movement carefully. You expected anger. Or confusion. Instead you found curiosity. The way he said it made my pulse skip again. I forced a light laugh. Well, curiosity is definitely better. I turned halfway toward my table, already imagining the avalanche of questions waiting for me. Then his voice reached me again. Olivia. I paused and looked back. He had not moved from his stool, but something in his posture had shifted slightly, as if he had made a quiet decision. You walked across a crowded bar to meet a stranger tonight, he said calmly. That kind of courage deserves at least one proper conversation. I hesitated. My friends were still staring from the booth. The music pulsed through the floor. The clock above the bar read 12:32 in glowing red numbers. Everything about the situation told me the sensible thing was to walk away. But something about Sebastian Hale made sensible decisions feel strangely unimportant. One conversation, I said slowly. 5 minutes. His eyes held mine with quiet certainty. 5 minutes, he agreed. I stayed where I was for a second longer than I meant to. 5 minutes, I reminded myself. That was the agreement. 5 minutes of conversation, and then I would go back to my booth, survive Tara's interrogation, and pretend this entire moment had not been the strangest part of my week. I stepped back toward the bar and leaned lightly against the empty stool beside him. Sebastian watched the movement with quiet attention, as if even small choices mattered. 5 minutes, I repeated. Then I disappear into the crowd. I will respect the agreement, he said calmly. The way he spoke made it sound less like a casual promise and more like a formal contract. I glanced at the glowing red numbers of the clock above the bar again. 12:33. The bass from the speakers pulsed softly through the floorboards. Someone ordered a round of shots down the counter. The place felt loud again, alive again, but the strange calm around Sebastian remained. So, I said, folding my arms loosely, since you already know my name and occupation, I guess it is your turn. His dark eyes lifted slightly with interest. My turn. Yes. Fair conversation rules. I gestured toward him. Who are you when you are not sitting alone in a bar looking mysterious? For a brief moment, he did not answer. Instead, he turned the whiskey glass slowly between his fingers, the amber liquid catching the warm light above the counter. When he finally spoke, his voice was as steady as before. I manage several businesses. I blinked. That sounds extremely vague. It is intentionally vague. I laughed quietly. That is suspicious. The corner of his mouth lifted again, the same controlled hint of amusement. Does it make you nervous? Not yet, I said. But it definitely makes me curious. He studied my face carefully, as if measuring the sincerity of that answer. Curiosity can be useful, he said. Or dangerous. You say that like you have experience with both. Perhaps I do. I noticed again the subtle awareness in the room around him. The bartender glanced in our direction every few seconds. The two men near the door remained watchful without appearing obvious. None of it felt threatening, but it felt organized in a way that most bars did not. I nodded toward the whiskey glass in his hand. Do you always drink the same thing? He glanced down briefly. Usually. And you always sit in the same spot. Often. I tilted my head slightly. You are a creature of habit. Routine can be useful. Or boring, I said. That earned another quiet exhale that sounded like a laugh. That depends on the routine. The clock ticked forward another minute. 12:34. I was aware of every passing second now. So tell me something not mysterious, I said. Something normal. He raised an eyebrow slightly. Define normal. Something about you that does not sound like the beginning of a crime documentary, I said. That time he did laugh, though softly, the sound low and controlled. Very well, he said after a moment. I prefer quiet restaurants. I dislike loud meetings. And I value punctuality. That is the most responsible answer I have ever heard in a bar after midnight, I said. Responsibility is underrated. I studied him for another second, trying to decide if he was joking or entirely serious. It was difficult to tell. Then something occurred to me. Wait, I said slowly. If you value punctuality, why are you still here after midnight? His eyes held mine steadily. Because sometimes, he said calmly, unexpected moments are worth staying for. The words landed between us with quiet weight. I felt heat rise slightly in my face and quickly glanced away toward the dance floor where a group of strangers had started cheering around the jukebox. When I looked back, Sebastian was still watching me with the same focused calm. The clock above the bar changed again. 12:35. 2 minutes left. And somehow those minutes suddenly felt very short. The clock above the bar shifted to 12:36, and I felt the quiet pressure of time returning. 5 minutes had sounded generous a moment ago. Now it felt like the seconds were slipping past faster than expected. I folded my hands lightly on the edge of the bar and looked at Sebastian again. He still appeared completely unhurried. The same calm presence he had been since the moment I walked across the room. If he noticed the passing time, he did not show it. 2 minutes, I said, glancing toward the clock again. Your agreement is about to expire. His eyes followed my glance briefly before returning to me. That is unfortunate. For you or for me? I asked. Possibly both. I laughed softly. You say things like that very confidently. Confidence is often misunderstood, he replied. It is usually just preparation. I tilted my head slightly. Preparation for what? Unexpected moments. The answer made me smile despite myself. I had the strange feeling that Sebastian Hale was a man who rarely said anything by accident. Every sentence sounded measured, deliberate, like he had considered it before speaking. I leaned against the stool beside him again, more relaxed now than I had been 5 minutes earlier. You know, I said thoughtfully, this entire situation is ridiculous. His eyebrow lifted slightly. In what way? A random dare, a stranger, a 5-minute conversation with someone who refuses to explain what he actually does for a living. He nodded slowly, as if reviewing the situation from the outside. When you say it like that, it does sound unusual. Unusual is polite. What word would you prefer? I pretended to think about it. Suspicious. That earned another quiet breath of amusement. The bartender passed again, and this time set a small glass of water in front of me without asking. I blinked in surprise. I did not order this. Sebastian glanced at the glass briefly. Hydration is generally a good idea after margaritas. I stared at him. Did you just instruct the bartender to bring me water without asking? I made a suggestion. That is dangerously close to ordering. His expression remained calm. Would you prefer that I apologize? I picked up the glass and took a small sip. No, I admitted. It is actually helpful. The cool water cleared the lingering warmth of the drinks, and my thoughts felt a little steadier again. I placed the glass back on the bar and glanced once more toward the glowing clock. 12:37. 1 minute left. Looks like time is almost up, I said. Your 5 minutes were surprisingly entertaining, he replied. I will consider that a compliment. It was meant as one. I took a small step away from the bar again, preparing to return to my friends before Tara decided to come rescue me herself. The music shifted to a slower song, the lights reflecting off the bottles behind the bar like small pieces of gold. For a brief second the moment felt strangely suspended, like something important had just happened without either of us fully understanding it yet. I looked at him again. Well, Sebastian Hale, I said lightly. This has been the most interesting conversation I have had with a stranger all year. His gaze remained steady, thoughtful. Then perhaps it should not end as a stranger conversation. I paused, meaning. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and placed a simple black business card on the polished wood between us. The card turned slowly as it slid across the bar until it stopped near my hand. I looked down at it. His name was printed in clean silver letters. Sebastian Hale. No company logo. No address. Only a phone number beneath the name. I looked back up at him. You are giving me your number? I am offering you the option of continuing a conversation that began with unusual courage. I picked up the card slowly, turning it between my fingers. The clock above the bar changed again. 12:38. My 5 minutes were officially over, and somehow it felt like the night had just begun. I held the black card between my fingers for a moment longer than I meant to. The silver letters caught the warm bar light as I turned it slightly, reading the name again even though I had already heard it once. Sebastian Hale. Just a name and a phone number. No company. No title. Nothing that explained why the bartender treated him like a regular customer who never needed to pay and why the men near the entrance watched the room like quiet shadows. I looked back up at him slowly. He had not moved. He simply waited, calm and patient, as if he already understood the way this moment might unfold. You always carry mysterious business cards? I asked. His expression shifted slightly with quiet amusement. Only when the evening becomes interesting. I glanced again at the glowing red numbers above the bar. 12:38. My 5 minutes had technically ended almost 30 seconds ago. Tara was now leaning halfway across the booth again, clearly trying to read the card from across the room. I could almost hear the questions forming in her head. I slipped the card between my fingers and tapped it lightly against the counter. So this is what happens when someone wins a dare, I said. They receive a mysterious phone number from a man who refuses to explain what he actually does. Sebastian studied me with that same steady focus. It is an invitation. To what? A conversation without a countdown clock. I let out a quiet breath of laughter. You are very confident that I will call. No, he said calmly. I am confident that you will think about it. I could not argue with that. I was already thinking about it. The strange thing was not the card itself. It was the calm certainty in his voice, the sense that he was used to decisions being made carefully and not in a rush. I slipped the card into the small pocket of my jacket. There, I said lightly. Now it will not fall into the margarita pitcher. His eyes followed the movement for half a second before returning to my face. A wise precaution. I glanced toward the booth again. Tara waved both arms dramatically the moment our eyes met. My friends had officially lost their patience. I shook my head with a small smile and turned back to Sebastian. My interrogation committee is about to send a search party. I suspected as much. I stepped away from the stool this time for real, adjusting my jacket and brushing my hands together like someone who had just finished a small but unusual task. The music in the bar shifted again, a louder song now, the bass shaking the floorboards beneath my boots. Well, I said, thank you for being unexpectedly polite about the entire situation. His gaze remained steady. Thank you for approaching a stranger without hesitation. That part was definitely the margarita, I said. Perhaps, he replied. But courage often arrives in unexpected forms. I took another step backward toward the crowd, the distance between us slowly widening. The strange calm that surrounded him began to dissolve as the noise of the bar filled the space again. Yet something about the moment still felt unfinished. I hesitated briefly. Sebastian, I said. His attention sharpened instantly. Yes. If I do not call, I said carefully, you will survive. The corner of his mouth lifted again in that small, controlled smile. I will manage. I nodded once, satisfied with the answer, and turned toward my table. The noise of my friends exploded the moment I reached the booth. Tara grabbed my arm like I had just returned from a secret mission. Olivia Bennett, she demanded dramatically, what on earth just happened? I laughed and slid into the booth beside her. I accepted a dare, I said simply. But as the music played and my friends began firing questions faster than I could answer them, I felt the small rectangle of black card resting in my jacket pocket. And somehow I knew the night was not going to leave my thoughts anytime soon. The moment I sat down, the booth erupted like I had just returned from a championship game. Tara grabbed both of my shoulders and shook me once, her eyes wide with excitement. Olivia Bennett, she said dramatically, you cannot just walk across a bar, kiss the most intimidating man in the building, and then come back here like nothing happened. I laughed and slid deeper into the booth while the others leaned forward like reporters waiting for a breaking story. The music thumped through the floor again, and the table vibrated slightly every time someone nearby jumped to the beat. It was 5 minutes, I said. Exactly 5 minutes. 5 minutes with that guy? Tara pointed across the bar like she expected him to still be sitting there like a statue. That man looked like he runs the city. I followed her finger instinctively and glanced back toward the corner of the bar. Sebastian was still there, exactly where I had left him, sitting calmly with his whiskey glass in front of him. Even from across the room, I could feel that same strange stillness around him. He did not seem like someone who blended into a crowd. He seemed like someone the room quietly adjusted around. I turned back to my friends quickly before they noticed me staring. He was just a guy having a drink, I said. A very serious guy, Tara insisted. What did he say when you kissed him? I felt heat rise to my face again, remembering the exact moment. He asked if there was a reason, I admitted. The table burst into laughter. And you said it was a dare? Someone asked. Of course, I said. Honesty felt safer than inventing something. Tara leaned closer immediately. And I hesitated for half a second before answering. And then we talked. Talked? She repeated. You kissed him, and then had a polite conversation? Yes. Who does that? I shrugged lightly and reached for the glass of water someone had slid toward me earlier. Apparently Sebastian Hale does. The name made the table quiet for a brief second. Sebastian Hale, Tara repeated slowly. That sounds like the name of someone who owns a skyscraper. Or a secret island, someone else added. I laughed again, though the name still carried a strange weight in my mind. He said he manages businesses. Tara narrowed her eyes suspiciously. That is not a real explanation. That is exactly what I said, I replied. The questions continued flying across the table faster than I could answer them. How tall was he? Did he smile? Did he seem dangerous? Did he ask for my number? I answered most of them with a shrug or a short explanation, but I kept one detail to myself. I did not mention the black business card resting quietly in the pocket of my jacket. My fingers brushed the edge of it through the fabric as I shifted in my seat. The small rectangle felt heavier than it should have. Tara was still watching me carefully. You are hiding something, she said suddenly. I am not. You absolutely are. I took another sip of water and forced a casual smile. The story is exactly what you saw. Tara looked unconvinced, but the music suddenly jumped louder as someone near the jukebox changed the song again. The moment passed as the table began arguing about whether we should order another round. I leaned back slightly and let the noise of the bar wash over the booth again. Laughter, glasses clinking, someone cheering near the dance floor. Everything felt normal again. Yet without meaning to, my eyes drifted across the bar one more time. Sebastian was no longer sitting alone. One of the men who had been near the door earlier now stood beside him, speaking quietly. Sebastian listened for a moment, then nodded once in that same calm, deliberate way. The man stepped away again immediately. Sebastian lifted his whiskey glass and took a slow sip before looking across the room. And for a brief second his eyes met mine again through the crowded bar. For a brief second the crowded bar disappeared. The music still played, people still laughed, glasses still clinked somewhere behind me. But none of it seemed to exist in that moment. Because across the room, Sebastian Hale was looking directly at me. Not by accident. Not casually scanning the crowd. Directly at me. The look was calm, steady, almost curious, like he had expected my eyes to drift back toward him eventually. My heart skipped in a way that made absolutely no sense. I looked away quickly and pretended to focus on Tara, who was now passionately explaining why pineapple absolutely belonged on pizza, while the rest of the table argued with her. I nodded along, though I had no idea what she was actually saying. My thoughts were somewhere else entirely. The strange thing was not that Sebastian had looked at me again. It was the feeling that the look had not been random. Like he had been aware of exactly where I was sitting the entire time. I shifted slightly in the booth and reached for the water glass again, hoping the cool sip would settle the sudden warmth in my face. "Olivia," Tara said suddenly, snapping her fingers in front of my face. "You disappeared again." "I did not disappear," I said, blinking. "You were absolutely not listening to a single word I just said." I gave a small guilty smile. I heard pineapple and pizza. That seemed like the main point. The table erupted again with half playful outrage and half laughter. Someone signaled the bartender for another round. The energy of the booth picked up again as the conversation drifted into weekend plans, work complaints, and the usual collection of stories that appeared after midnight, when everyone felt slightly braver than normal. Yet the entire time I could feel the small rectangle of the business card resting in my jacket pocket. I had almost forgotten it during the chaos of the table. Now it felt impossible to ignore. I slipped my hand casually into my pocket, touching the edge of the card just to confirm it was still there. Smooth. Simple. Real. Tara caught the movement instantly. Her eyes narrowed. "What was that?" she asked. "What was what?" "You just checked your pocket like you were hiding something." I pulled my hand back out quickly. "Habit." She stared at me for another second before turning back to the table conversation, but I knew that look. Tara Bennett had the instincts of a detective when she believed something interesting was happening. I leaned back slightly, letting the noise of the bar fill the space again. The music was louder now. A group near the center of the floor had started dancing. The bartender moved quickly between orders as the crowd thickened closer to 1 a.m. Everything about the night should have felt normal again. And yet my attention drifted back across the room once more. Sebastian was standing now. The stool beside the bar was empty. He had not rushed to leave. He moved with the same calm, deliberate pace I had noticed earlier, adjusting his jacket slightly as he spoke quietly with the man who had approached him before. The two men near the entrance straightened when he stood. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. The movement looked less like coincidence and more like quiet coordination. A strange thought crossed my mind before I could stop it. Who exactly is this man? Sebastian finished speaking with the man beside him and turned slightly toward the exit. For half a second I thought he might simply leave without another glance. Instead his eyes moved across the room again. And once more, somehow they found me. The moment his eyes found mine again across the crowded room, the strange stillness returned. It lasted less than a second, but it felt longer, like the noise of the bar dimmed just enough for the moment to stand out. Sebastian did not wave. He did not smile. He simply held my gaze briefly, the same calm expression resting on his face, as if acknowledging something unspoken. Then he nodded once. A small, polite gesture. The kind someone might give across a quiet restaurant instead of a crowded bar filled with music and laughter. I felt my stomach flip unexpectedly. Then he turned toward the door. The movement was smooth and unhurried, like he had already decided exactly when he would leave long before the night began. The two men near the entrance shifted again the moment he stepped forward. They did not crowd him. They did not rush him. They simply adjusted their positions so that the path to the door opened naturally in front of him. The entire movement was so subtle that most people in the bar probably did not notice it at all. But I noticed, and the strange feeling returned again. Who is this man? Olivia, Tara said suddenly, snapping me back to the table again. You are staring. I blinked quickly and looked back at her. I am not staring. You are absolutely staring. She twisted slightly in her seat, trying to follow my line of sight across the bar. I grabbed her arm quickly. Do not turn around. Her eyebrows shot up immediately. Why? Because that makes it obvious. Obvious that what? I hesitated for half a second. That I might have been looking at him again. Tara grinned instantly. Oh, you were definitely looking at him again. I groaned softly and leaned back against the booth. It was one glance. Sure, she said with a dramatic nod. Just one glance at the mysterious man with the intense eye contact. The table erupted into laughter again, and someone slid a fresh drink toward Tara while the argument about music choices started again. I let the noise fill the space while I tried to focus on the conversation, but my attention drifted again before I could stop it. The door near the entrance opened as Sebastian reached it. Cool night air spilled briefly into the room. For a moment the street outside was visible under the glow of the city lights. A black car was waiting at the curb, not unusual by itself. Plenty of cars passed outside the bar all night. But this one was not passing. It was waiting. The driver stepped out briefly and opened the rear door just as Sebastian reached the sidewalk. The movement was smooth and practiced, like it happened every day. Sebastian paused for a second before getting in, just long enough to glance back through the bar window. Our eyes met again through the glass. Then he disappeared into the car. The door closed. The car pulled away from the curb and vanished into the late-night traffic of the city. The entire moment lasted maybe 10 seconds. But when I turned back toward the table, Tara was watching me again with the exact same suspicious expression. Okay, she said slowly. Now you definitely look like someone who just watched something interesting. I grabbed the water glass again and took another sip. It was just a guy leaving a bar, I said calmly. Tara leaned closer with a knowing smile. Olivia, she said. You kissed him first. And somehow I have the feeling that was not the end of the story. I did not answer. Because the strange thing was that I had the exact same feeling. For the next 20 minutes the bar returned to its normal rhythm, but my mind did not. The music grew louder as the crowd thickened closer to 1 in the morning. Someone near the dance floor convinced half the room to sing along to an old song that everyone somehow knew the words to. Tara ordered another round for the table, even though she had already promised twice that the last one was truly the last one. Normally, I would have been fully part of the chaos. Tonight, I found myself drifting in and out of the conversation instead. The image of the black car pulling away from the curb replayed in my head again and again. The calm way Sebastian had moved. The quiet coordination of the men near the door. The driver opening the car door before he even reached the sidewalk. None of it looked like coincidence. Okay, Tara said suddenly, tapping the table with both hands. I cannot focus on anything else until we solve this. I blinked. Solve what? The mystery man situation. I groaned softly and leaned back against the booth. There is no mystery. Olivia, she said slowly. You walked across a bar, kissed a man who looks like he stepped out of a movie, talked to him for 5 minutes, and now you are pretending it was normal. Someone else at the table nodded. She has a point. I laughed and rubbed my forehead. It was a dare. That was the entire story. Tara narrowed her eyes again. Then why do you keep touching your jacket pocket? I froze for half a second before realizing my fingers had drifted there again without thinking. The edge of the card pressed lightly against the inside fabric. Tara noticed instantly. Uh-huh, she said triumphantly. You are hiding something. The entire table leaned forward again like a pack of curious reporters. I sighed slowly. It is nothing dramatic. Show us. I hesitated. The card suddenly felt more personal than it had when Sebastian first slid it across the bar. But the way everyone was staring at me made it impossible to pretend it did not exist. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled the card out slowly. The black surface caught the warm light above the booth just like it had at the bar earlier. Tara grabbed it immediately. Sebastian Hale, she read aloud. That name sounds expensive. Someone leaned closer. There is only a phone number. Tara flipped the card over. No company name. No address. She looked at me dramatically. That is either very mysterious or very rich. I shrugged lightly. He said it was an invitation to continue the conversation. Tara stared at me like she had just discovered treasure. You are absolutely calling him. I did not say that. You are absolutely calling him, she repeated. I took the card back and slipped it into my jacket pocket again before anyone else could grab it. I have work tomorrow morning, I said calmly. In a normal life that does not include mysterious businessmen. Tara leaned back slowly, studying me like she was trying to read the ending of a book before the final chapter. Maybe, she said thoughtfully. But something tells me this story is not finished. I did not answer right away. Instead, I glanced toward the bar window where the streetlights outside glowed softly against the dark sidewalk. Somewhere out there, the black car had disappeared into the city traffic. I slipped my hand into my pocket again and felt the edge of the card between my fingers. And for the first time that night, a quiet question formed clearly in my mind. What would actually happen if I called that number? The rest of the night passed faster than I expected. The music kept changing, the crowd kept growing, and the energy in the bar slowly shifted from loud excitement to the loose, tired laughter that happens when people realize it is getting close to last call. By the time the bartender rang the small brass bell near the register, the clock above the bar read 1:47 in the morning. Tara groaned dramatically and rested her head on the table. Why does last call always arrive when the night is finally interesting? She complained. Someone laughed. Someone else began gathering jackets and empty glasses. I slid out of the booth and stretched my arms over my head, feeling the long day finally catch up with me. Because normal people have to wake up tomorrow, I said. Tara pointed at me immediately. That is exactly why you should text the mysterious man tonight. I rolled my eyes and reached for my jacket. That is absolutely not happening tonight. Why not? Because, I said calmly, pulling my sleeves straight. I do not make life decisions at 1:47 in the morning after 2 margaritas and a dare. Tara stood beside me and studied my face carefully. But you were thinking about it. I did not answer right away. Instead, I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket again and felt the familiar edge of the card resting there. The small rectangle had been sitting quietly against the fabric for almost 2 hours now, and somehow the weight of it had not faded. We stepped outside together into the cool Chicago night. The air felt calmer after the warmth and noise of the bar. Streetlights stretched down the block in soft golden lines, and the distant hum of traffic drifted between the buildings. A few other groups spilled out onto the sidewalk laughing as they waited for rides or began the slow walk home. Tara crossed her arms and leaned against the brick wall beside the entrance. So, she said again, are you calling him tomorrow? I exhaled slowly and looked up at the dark sky above. The street. I do not know. That is not a no. It is also not a yes. She smiled knowingly. Olivia Bennett, she said. You have the look of someone who just opened the first page of a very interesting book. I laughed quietly at that and pulled the card from my pocket again. Under the streetlight, the silver letters reflected softly. Sebastian Hale. A name. A phone number. That was all. No explanation. No promises. Just a possibility. I turned the card once between my fingers before slipping it back into my pocket. We will see, I said. Tara shook her head with a smile. You are definitely calling him. I did not argue, because as we started walking down the quiet street toward the parking lot, the thought returned again, stronger this time. Not what if I call him, but what happens next if I do? The drive home felt quieter than usual. The city was still awake, but the streets had thinned enough that the headlights passing by looked more like slow-moving streams of light instead of the usual crowded rush. I parked outside my apartment building just after 2:20 in the morning and sat in the car for a moment with the engine off, listening to the soft ticking sound of the cooling dashboard. The night air outside carried that familiar Chicago chill that always arrived after midnight, even in the warmer months. I leaned back against the seat and exhaled slowly. It had been an ordinary night. At least it had started that way. Drinks with friends. Loud music. A stupid dare that should have been forgotten the moment it happened. Yet somehow the entire evening had shifted because of one unexpected conversation at the bar. My hand slipped into my jacket pocket again without thinking. The edge of the card brushed against my fingers immediately. I pulled it out slowly and looked at it again under the dim glow of the streetlight outside the windshield. Sebastian Hale. The silver letters reflected softly in the dark. Just a name. Just a phone number. Nothing about it explained the quiet confidence in his voice or the calm way the entire room seemed to adjust around him. Nothing about it explained the car waiting outside the bar or the driver opening the door before he even reached the sidewalk. I turned the card once between my fingers, thinking about the way he had looked at me across the room just before he left. Calm. Certain. Almost like he already knew something I had not figured out yet. I laughed quietly to myself. This is ridiculous, I said out loud to the empty car. I was a physical therapy assistant who spent most of my days reminding patients to stretch their shoulders and drink enough water. My biggest daily challenge was convincing people to follow their rehabilitation plans. My life was predictable in the best possible way. Yet tonight a complete stranger had somehow slipped a small question into the middle of that normal routine. What would happen if I called that number? I looked down at the card again. It would be easy to forget about it. Easy to tuck it into a drawer and treat the whole thing like a funny story from a late night out with friends. I could already imagine telling Tara a week from now that I never called him and watching her complain dramatically about wasted opportunities. That would be the sensible choice. The safe choice. I slipped the card back into my pocket and stepped out of the car, the cool air brushing against my face as I locked the door and walked toward the entrance of my building. Somewhere behind the city skyline, the first hint of early morning was beginning to soften the dark sky. I paused at the front steps and looked back down the quiet street for a moment. Then I smiled to myself and headed inside. Because the truth was simple. Some nights, in the moment you walk away from them. And some nights leave you with a single unanswered question waiting quietly in your pocket.